I did my paper/poster on the effect of exercise on autism spectrum disorder in children, adolescents, and young adults. So the main problem that I wanted to look at here was that, as you probably know, obesity is constantly rising, especially childhood obesity, and some populations, such as those with autism spectrum disorder, are more vulnerable to the consequences because of some of the limitations that they have. And so I wanted to just look at how exercise can improve some of those areas, hopefully kind of combat the short and long-term effects and health risks. So I looked at 13 studies, and I focused on kind of 7 areas. So those were metabolic health factors, which I'll talk more about, social skills, motor skills, academic performance, stereotypical behaviors, quality of life, and sleep patterns. So for the studies that I looked at, most of them were children, just because that's where most of the research comes from. But there were some that had young adults, so they were all aged 21 and younger. And so what they did in these studies is they introduced some sort of aerobic exercise, so that was mostly cycling, swimming, walking, jogging, things like that. And so they did it for a period of, the lowest that I looked at was 10 weeks, and then the highest was 48 weeks. So it just kind of depended on what the researchers chose to do. So like I said, I focused on 7 areas, and the first one was metabolic health factors. So the first thing it did was improve BMI. So if you don't know what that is, that's a body mass index, and you calculate that by taking your weight divided by your height. And so it's not always the best indicator, but it's a very commonly used indicator for seeing what your risks are for health diseases and things like that. So it actually improved the BMI from highly obese to borderline levels, and so you can see that in the first graph. It's the solid lines. So this top line, as you can kind of see, it went from around 33, which would be considered highly obese, down to around 30, which is kind of the borderline level for obesity. And then the lower line would be the experimental group. So some more metabolic factors that it improved was increased your level of HDLs, which are high-density lipoproteins. So those are like your good cholesterol, the ones that go in and clear everything out. And then it decreased the level of low-density lipoproteins. So those are the ones that build up and cause problems. So it also lowered the amount of total cholesterol they had, and then lowered their levels of triglycerides, which are, that's how we store fat in our bodies. So these two right here. So as you can see, this one is the HDL, so this dotted line. As you can see, there's a very big increase, and then right here, these are the LDLs, so there was a very large decrease as well. So the next thing is stereotypic behaviors. So those kind of consist of toe walking, word repetition, rocking back and forth. And so what these studies found was that doing multiple bouts of exercise decreased those behaviors temporarily. So that's one kind of important thing to keep in mind, is that the physiological origins of the behaviors were still the same. It didn't affect that, but short term it did kind of relieve some of those symptoms, and so that can be beneficial for example, in like an academic setting, to kind of lower those temporarily so that they are more able to focus. Social skills. So what they did for this was they immersed individuals in a group setting. Most of the time they were in a group of 2 with 1 instructor, and then they did that 3 times a week, and then every once in a while they would have a big group do some sort of exercise. So what that did was just kind of decrease the hostility, the aggressiveness that sometimes comes in those settings, and also made them more susceptible to, or more willing to engage with others. And again, that's something important to keep in mind with the social skills, is that that's very dependent on symptom severity. So if the individual had like a more severe case of autism spectrum disorder, then they weren't going to be as willing to interact with the others. The next one is motor skills. So what they did for this was they introduced some sort of activity, such as maybe throwing or catching a ball. so some coordination things, and then maybe some balance exercises. So what they found here was that it increased the gross and fine motor skills. And so what that does is it helps them kind of decrease the erratic movements that kind of come with the loss of focus, and it also helps them have more control over their muscle movements. The next is academic performance. So this is, like I said, this was something that they did throughout the day. So what they would do is go and do like a 10-minute bout of maybe, I think they jumped on a mini trampoline, or they would go outside and jog, something like that, and then come back in the classroom and assess how the students were when they came back. And so what they found was that it increased the number of correct answers that the kids gave, and then it also helped them keep their focus. And again, that's something that is temporary, so that would be something that they could do, multiple times throughout the day. So that would be more beneficial in like a classroom that was just for, exceptional students. It's not something that's kind of practical to do in just a regular classroom. The next thing is quality of life. So because, like I said, most of this was done on children, the quality of life was perceived, and it was reported by the parents. So what that was they perceived that the quality of life had increased physically and psychosocially. So that can range from the amount of pain that the child was in, their moods, their behavior, how much they depended on their parents for certain things. And so what they found was that all of that increased after they were in an exercise program. Next thing is sleep patterns. So as you probably know, sleep is associated with better cognitive functioning, better mood, those kind of things. So what they found was that on the nights following the nights following exercise, the parents reported that their child's sleep lasted longer, and then they also had a better mood the next day. And they also ran tests on them, and they found that they had more time in deep sleep. It took them took them a shorter amount of time to fall asleep, and then also the sleep efficiency increased. So as far as exercise prescription goes, the best option is to have aerobic exercise of moderate to vigorous intensity. So you want enough to stimulate them, but not enough to overwhelm. And the best thing to do, like I've said a few times, is to do multiple bouts of short durations. So you don't want to do something, again, that's going to overwhelm them, but if you do it multiple times throughout the day, then it's going to help with some of those things that only are beneficial temporarily. And so altogether, the hope is that, especially with children, is that early intervention, if you go ahead and start an exercise regimen as they're young, then hopefully it can help combat not just obesity, but hopefully help the long and short-term increases in all of these areas and reduce the risk of cardiovascular diseases later in life. Thank you.